Can Alireza Firouzja do the unthinkable and win the Candidates Chess Tournament 2022? Now, going into it, he's not the favourite, we know that, but he does have this exceptional ability to take down even the strongest players in the world, and that's what rose him to number 2 in the world last year, the youngest player ever to cross 2800. So if anyone can do it at such a young age, it's Alireza if he turns up and plays his best stuff. And it makes me wonder whether he's destined to actually do it already. I think he's destined to become world champion, but how soon will it be? Now, if he's going to take down these great players, well, this is the kind of style that he'll need to bring. So I'm looking today at a game he played 4 years ago, actually. This was in 2018. It was the World Junior Championship, and he was playing against the online sensation Andrew Tang. So it's this style of play that he needs to bring to the tournament if he's going to stand a chance. Let's see what happened in this one. He was playing black here, and he played the Dutch defence after d4, pawn f5. This starts the Dutch. And we actually saw Alireza playing the so-called Leningrad Dutch. So it starts with this move of pawn to g6 here. You're going to fianchetto the bishop, very similar to the King's Indian in a lot of the ideas. So now we had bishop to g2, bishop g7, both players castled, and the main way for white to set up here is with pawn c4, knight c3, that kind of standard development. But Andrew plays differently, a very solid way to play, pawn b3, d6 from Alireza, and then he plonks that bishop here. So pawn c6 now from Alireza, a flexible move, taking control of d5. You want to get e5 at some point with black if you can, but you really have to time it right. That's the struggle here. So knight b to d2 now, and knight a6. Now, it's not an easy game to understand this for beginners. Why is that knight going all the way to the edge of the board? Well, it actually wants to look for work either here or on c5 later in the game, say if that pawn ever disappeared. But okay, the pieces are getting out right now. Pawn e3 from Andrew, and now knight to e4 from Alireza. Very logical. You open up the bishop here, and white doesn't want to be taking that one because after pawn recaptures, let's say knight to d2 attacking it, well, you can push on with d5. You set up a big centre here. Black's actually doing okay. So we didn't have takes on e4. Queen e2 continued developing, connected the rooks. Queen c7 from Alireza. Rook a to d1. And now you can take on d2 here. It's not a good way to play, but it's possible with the idea of then going e5. But this is what I mean about timing, because white can now actually check here, king moves, bishop a3, just get this big initiative, and you've not yet finished your development, the rooks aren't connected. This is quite a bit better for white here. So you really have to time this stuff right. Alireza doesn't take on d2, he instead goes bishop to d7, and after knight e1 from Andrew, pressuring this knight now with 2 pieces, well, how many players here would just take on d2, let's say? But this is the point about Alireza's style. He doesn't do that. He goes knight g5. He's so good at keeping pieces on the board and creating complications, issues for his opponent to solve. So this knight now hit d3. The rook centralized here. And now pawn h4 further kicks this knight back. But at least now from f7, it supports e5. But white's clearly better here, got that space, got the better piece placement. You know, this knight's on the edge of the board. And you can play a bit more slowly here with rook f to e1, decent move. But Andrew already strikes in the centre here. And now Alireza counter strikes with pawn to e5. So we had captures on e5. Alireza now recaptured that one. And here I think white just went slightly wrong. It's still a good move, but taking on f5 just seems so logical to me here to open up that e-file. Now if the pawn recaptures, your queen finds a nice home here. The pawn's just left g6. And if instead the bishop takes in this position here, well then there's knight e4. You're getting a nice blockade. This bishop looks pretty bad, so does the knight. Good position for white. But instead of taking on f5, the rook came to e1 here. Still a decent move, but now Alireza can really drum up all the kind of complications that he's looking for in this position. So after he pushes on here, that pawn was taken, this one took back, and now you can exchange those bishops off here, but instead e5 was played immediately, threatening pawn e6, so the bishop came outside, hit f5, and now you don't want to actually snap off this pawn too soon on f4, then this pawn becomes weak, plus the bishop's looking at c2, so knight f3 is very logical. You hold this pawn, the queen now covers here, you prepare to take on f4 in just a moment. So queen e7 from Alireza, the knight took on f4 here, and now the bishop came to g4. It couldn't previously do that, the knight was here, the queen covered that square, but now that it can, it finds a good home there, pressures the white position, and the knight hopped back into d3. Now that it's won that pawn, it just re-supports this one, and this is better for white right now. So knight h6 from Alireza, he needs to bring his pieces into the attack. Queen e4, good centralizing move. The knight now came back to c7, and bishop c1, excellent move from Andrew. The job is done on that diagonal, it's staring at its own pawn, so the bishop re-maneuvers, looking at g5, looking at the knight on h6. Alireza now goes knight e6, a great blockading square, and you can carry on here with, say, bishop to d2, play a bit more slowly, keep your bishop pair, but Andrew decides to chop here. Now why is he giving up the bishop pair? Well, you can't recapture immediately, or then you lose a piece on g4, so Alireza had to take on f3 first, the bishop recaptured, and only then did he take on h6, and white was assessing this as a good simplification using this pawn, but the game remains complex, and as so often in the King's Indian, black is really looking to play on these dark squares now for counterplay here. So the bishop now came to g4, Alireza jumped his knight into f4 here, and after queen c4 check, king h8, that dangerous knight was just chopped off on f4, the rook recaptured here. What's going on? Are you losing a piece? Well, rook e4 comes in the way, and so Alireza supported that rook, he brought it to the f-file, and this is really the battle now. Can Alireza crash through on, say, f2, or is this passed pawn for white just going to be too dangerous here? So the rook captured on f4, bishop recaptures, the pawn kicked on to e6, and now Alireza takes on h4 here. White couldn't actually protect that one, but it only restores the material balance here, and white has the dangerous passer. So queen c3 check played, the king came to g8, and now here white goes wrong. You don't necessarily want to exchange the queens, but here coming to h3 is the best move. You suspect Alireza would have tried to keep the queens on with queen g5, his usual style. Game goes on, it's a rough equality here, but instead of moving the queen across, the bishop dropped back to h3, but now it becomes a bit of a tactical liability there. So bishop c7 was played by Alireza, an excellent move. It opens up the rook, attacks this square with the queen and rook, and the bishop is now bouncing around here. So rook d2 defended that pawn, bishop b6, and now it's really tough for white to actually find moves. The problem is you can't actually defend this pawn with your queen. It can't come to e3, of course, and if it comes to g3 here, well, then you can actually take the queen. You can't put it there because the pawn is pinned by the bishop. So this one got pushed to e7. White's actually chucking a pawn here, which Alireza takes, but just desperately trying to drum up some play. You can now do these checks, but Alireza blocks with the rook here, and there's still a lot of pressure piling down against this pawn, threats to check down here. So the king came to f1, covering that square, king to f8, breaks the pin, and now queen c3, there's a threat of mate in 1, so the rook came to f6 here, rook e2 challenged the queen, it hopped into d6, once again there's threats to check, and here white goes wrong. You should cover with the queen. This is the best way, because not only do you cover the d-file, but you also cover this f4 square. After the rook blocked this file, well, now Alireza went queen to f4, and it pressures here, but also threatens to now swing across to the king side again, attack this lonely bishop. So the rook came back to e2 here, And this is where black just has to be a little bit careful, because if you crash through on f2 immediately, can you see the tactic for white that is just completely winning the game here? So the move white could play here is queen takes on f6 check. You force the queen to recapture, and then you take with the rook here, and you're actually winning that black queen. You're emerging a whole bishop up. Should be winning, even though black has these two connected passes here. So Alireza didn't take on f2. Of course he saw this. He played queen to h4 instead, and this actually just forced resignation, because not only are you now pressuring to take here for real, but you also attack this bishop. So for example, you can't go queen d2, overprotecting that pawn, because then of course you're just losing a whole bishop on h3. So a lovely game from Alireza in the Dutch defence. Don't miss any of my commentary of the candidates coming up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel to never miss a game, then click below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.